Welcome back, focused learners. So glad you're here for another explainer. Today, we're diving into something really profound, the examined life. You know, we often look at these highly optimistic, super capable people and we just assume, well, they were just born that way, right? We kind of treat optimism like it's this sunny disposition you're either blessed with or you're not. But what if it's not some innate personality trait at all? What if true bulletproof optimism is actually a daily discipline? Well, that is exactly what we're unpacking today. Okay, let's dive into this with a deceptively simple observation from Kevin Kelly. He says, over the long term, the future is decided by optimists. To be an optimist, you don't have to ignore all the many problems we create. You just have to imagine improving our capacity to solve problems. This totally flips the script, doesn't it? Optimism isn't about just ignoring the bad stuff and putting on rose-colored glasses. It is truly about actively, relentlessly improving our own capacity to solve those problems. But you know, that quote leaves a massive question hanging in the air. Think about this for a second. What kind of person actually does that? Like, what kind of person consistently grows their capacity to solve problems day in and day out? I'll tell you right now, it is not the loudest person in the room. No way. It's not the most naturally talented person either, or the one walking around with the most unearned confidence. The person who really grows their capacity, that's the examined person. The one who's actually willing to do the hard, unglamorous work on themselves. And this brilliantly illustrates that whole concept. You've probably bumped into the Japanese concept of ikigai before, right? It usually gets reduced to this simple career planning tool. You know, find what you love, what pays, what the world needs. But instead of just career planning, our sources today map out ikigai as this deeply internal foundation. These aren't just isolated choices or random lines that happen to cross. They're actually four coherent strands: self-knowledge, discernment, strategic patience, and our flawed humanity. They all stem from one source and arrive at one destination. So today, we're going to unravel these four threads and then weave them all back together.
Thread 1. Self-knowledge. Let's start by pulling on this very first thread. And to really grasp just how elusive self-knowledge can be, we need to look at a highly successful leader. Her name is Cecile Reynal, former Florida State volleyball coach, and she agreed to this absolutely fascinating audio experiment.
Now, Coach Reno was an absolute master of her craft. We're talking 26 years leading her team, over 600 match wins, 3 Conference Coach of the Year awards, the whole shebang. By any external metrics, she was basically flawless. But she decided to do something incredibly brave. She allowed a university study to record her voice during a standard, run-of-the-mill 3-hour practice. And wow, the result was completely humbling. Out of 3 hours, 2 hours and 45 minutes. That is how long Coach Reno realized she had been talking, almost the entire time. It just goes to show most leaders have absolutely no idea what they sound like to the people around them. Coaches interrupt, managers dominate the conversation, teachers repeat themselves into irrelevance, and they are completely blind to it. So why does this happen? Well, it's because your typical leader relies heavily on an outward feedback loop. They're just broadcasting without really listening. The energy only goes one way. Renaud, however, embraced what we call the inward diagnostic gaze. She invited honest critique and famously summed up her findings by quoting Taylor Swift, "I'm the problem, it's me." And actually, the ancient philosophers Seneca and Epictetus championed this exact generative power way back when. Seneca said, "Nothing proves a well-ordered mind better than the ability to stop and pass time in your own company." And Epictetus, he basically commanded us to work on ourselves daily. This examined pause, it isn't just empty isolation. It's a highly creative, highly diagnostic space. Thread 2, discernment. That inward gaze perfectly builds our second thread. Because once we've looked inward, how do we actually process all of that information hitting us from the outside? It takes a really delicate balance. Tony Dungy shares this perfect little anecdote about his friend Scott's son, Nathan. Nathan found himself in a pretty tricky spot. His Little League coach was giving him some genuinely bad baseball advice. He was telling him to field grounders with his feet and knees completely together. Obviously, that felt wrong to Nathan, and his dad confirmed, yeah, that's definitely wrong. Now, Nathan's dad didn't just tell him to openly rebel right there on the field. Instead, he told him to respect the coach at practice, but then practice the correct technique at home. That right there, that is true discernment. It prevents us from falling into the trap of this deeply acidic yet kind of hilarious Mark Twain quote, "No amount of evidence will ever persuade an idiot." The real danger of a closed mind isn't a lack of information, right? It's that arrogant predecision that absolutely no further information is necessary. To avoid that trap altogether, we need what's known as the Berean posture. This means eagerly welcoming evidence and, importantly, taking the actual time to verify the truth. You don't just blindly accept everything, but you definitely don't cynically reject everything either. You have to reverently earn your confident conclusions internally. It really echoes Sun Tzu's concept of pretended inferiority. The person who's actually done the hard work of testing and knowing, they don't need to loudly announce their certainty to the whole room. They act from a deeply secure internal foundation.
Thread 3. Strategic patience. Okay, fair warning on this one. It might seem a bit counterintuitive at first, mainly because it requires a tactic you'd probably usually associate with losing. But I want to be crystal clear here. We are not talking about passivity. Passivity is just doing nothing and waiting around to be saved. What author Robert Greene advocates for, though, is the surrender tactic. He argues that when you're weaker, you really shouldn't fight just for honor's sake. Actually, scratch that. It's more like you should actively choose surrender, to give yourself the time to recover and wait for the enemy's power to wane. Plato echoed this too, suggesting that only the person who relinquishes the desire for power is actually fit to hold it. This is strategic restraint. It's a structural choice to endure in the short term just so you can gain capacity later. It's knowing exactly when to wait and keeping your eyes on the long arc of your life rather than the immediate ego boost of some quick, pointless battle.
So the crucial point is captured just beautifully in this piece of ancient wisdom from the Bhagavad Gita. You have the right to work, but for the work's sake only. You have no right to the fruits of work. This really anchors the spiritual dimension of everything we're discussing today. It's all about working with absolute 100% full effort, taking real action, but entirely uncoupling yourself from expected rewards. You earn what you earn for sure, but you keep moving forward without desperately grasping for a specific outcome.
Thread 4. Imperfect humanity. Which brings us to our fourth and final thread. So we've talked about deep self-knowledge, earning the truth, and practicing extreme patience. But we've got to watch out for the paralyzing trap of perfectionism. It's so easy to think, well, I can't act until I'm perfectly self-aware and perfectly patient. To really dismantle that trap, author Ryan Holiday shares a deeply moving anecdote about comedian Pete Davidson. Davidson's father was a firefighter, and he died heroically saving lives during the collapse of the Twin Towers on September 11th. Now, for a young boy, a memory like that constructs an image of a completely flawless superhero, as it absolutely should. But as Davidson grew older, he had to learn a pretty difficult reality. His father, just like all of us, had some really deep struggles. He had a troubled marriage, he struggled with drugs, and got into difficulty more than once. The superhero was, in reality, entirely messily human. Now, what's really interesting about this is how these revelations actually affected Davidson. Like Ryan Holiday notes, we are all complicated. Every single one of us is a work in progress. Discovering these flaws didn't diminish his father at all. It actually elevated the hero. Davidson realized his dad had problems just like everybody else, but his morals were still intact, and absolutely none of his flaws prevented him from making the ultimate sacrifice when it mattered most. The takeaway here, we do not need to be flawless to act with tremendous integrity.
Weaving the braid together. All right, we've unraveled the 4 threads: self-knowledge, discernment, patience, and imperfection. Now it's time to weave this braid together into one coherent whole. Because the examined life isn't just about collecting these 4 random traits and keeping them locked away in separate boxes. It's really about how they interact, how they challenge, and how they test one another. As historian Edward Tenner observed, sometimes things can go right only by first going very, very wrong. Think about it. Coach Renaud, she had to brutally confront her own flaws to actually become a better listener. Nathan had to learn the wrong baseball technique to truly understand and master the right one. The strategic player has to endure weakness so they can return from a position of strength. And Pete Davidson had to grieve a perfect mythical father before he could truly love a real human one. The examined life is literally lived through failure and revision. True optimism is built only after you have studied what went wrong, adjusted, and grown your capacity. I want to leave you with this lingering, deeply provocative question, which is drawn from George Rovling's retelling of that volleyball coach's story. I want you to ask yourself right now, would you want to play for you? If your honest answer is not yet, hey, don't be discouraged, because that is exactly where the beautiful daily work of the examined life begins today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep testing, keep growing, and I'll catch you next time.